Hello, everyone. It's Kate with the Thrive with Kate podcast, and I'm here with Kristina Scaglione of Root and Rise CS, which stands for Clinical Specialist.com. And they work with people. I'd love for you just to talk about, Kristina, about like how you got into the work of trauma informed therapy and mental health and physical wellness and how you're tying this together at Root and Rise.
Okay, so I'll try to be brief as it's 14 years of therapy, but I started as a volunteer at a nonprofit organization here in New York where they worked with a lot of homeless and persistent mental health conditions. And from there, I decided I wanted to go into social work school. I went into social work school and learned a lot of different directions that you can take with social work. It's extremely broad. I eventually decided I wanted to go into private practice. I went through a training model called Advanced Holistic Counseling that I did for about 7 years, and then I went into my own section of that. And then I've incorporated lots of different clinicians to assist my clients on their wellness journey, and every clinician that's part of this now is they specialize in something different. And it could be anything from a physical layer to a mental layer to a spiritual layer that they might work on.
Okay, great. So with trauma recovery, do you want to just talk a little bit like why this is such a buzzword right now?
Sure. I would say that trauma recovery has been around a long time. I would say that it's probably more of a buzzword now because of social media. I feel like people are talking about things that have been in the field for decades. It's just that we have so much more knowledge available to us at one given time that we're now starting to get all of the things that people have really been working on for years. For example, the book The Body Keeps Score has been around for over 2 decades, but now everybody's talking about it. And I would say it's because we have so much proof now that we can trace the trauma that gets stored in your body, and so many illnesses are linked to how trauma is either worked on or not worked on, and that how that manifests in your physical conditions that you cope with every single day. That now it's kind of this marriage of how can we heal ourselves and what's available to us to assist us on that journey.
And so when you're looking at like trauma informed or trauma recovery, like what are your like in terms of just like baseline assumptions? Is it like everyone has work to do in trauma recovery, or is it just like certain individuals who are really struggling with some of the physiological signs of having maybe an immune system that's suppressed or overloaded?
Okay, so in my own personal work, I wouldn't blanket that everybody has trauma, but I would say that everybody has different experiences with levels of trauma. And I would say, I feel like if we were to say everybody's traumatized, that would be too general. I would also say that, doing the work that I do in my sessions, EMDR, EFT, which is emotional freedom technique or nicknamed tapping, I'm able to work through what somebody might consider like a small temporary traumatic event to something that was very more systemic in their lives. So I think, when it comes to physiological symptoms, I'm not sure everybody's able to link without assistance, without help and guidance, that they can link these particular things that they're experiencing without a clinician helping them or a coach helping them with that. I don't have a one size fits all model, so it's really about excavating and developing that relationship with that individual, the art of conversation, and figuring out what it is that they've experienced that has kind of informed them and how they live. I think that it's a little bit more complex. I would say that I could work on anyone, but I would need to know a little bit more.
Most ambitious women are running on 1 to 2 strengths, while 3 blind spots are holding them back. That's why fragmented success feels exhausting. In 2 minutes, the Sacred Ambition Assessment shows you your elemental signature: space, earth, fire, air, water, so you can see exactly what's powering you and what's quietly capping you. Quick clarity, no fluff. Take the Sacred Ambition Assessment. I designed it. It's really fun, and you'll get your element, you'll get your edge, and then you can schedule with me a Sacred Ambition session. See you there. Go to clubthrive.global/ambition and do your Sacred Ambition Assessment. It only takes a few minutes, and your insights can last a lifetime.
Detail.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do see that there's like there's so much that in just like consumer culture that I'd see as traumatic, right? That we're not born as citizens really in a consumer culture. We're born as consumers. And so I do feel like that's traumatizing on an existential level. And
Yeah.
then also just massive like people that were born into unattachment style of parenting in the postpartum years, like for people like I know like my mom's generation of mothering where it was, you know, basically like doctor knows best and cry it out, isolation and whatnot. I believe traumatized like just massive groups within the population. So I'm just kind of curious about that. Like, because that's one of the things that I do see in my work is like that, like, yeah, I mean, there's people that are severely traumatized with PTSD type life experiences, but then like, what about these more subtle cultural paradigms that we're maybe awakening out of?
I would only hope that we would continue that awakening process, if I'm being honest. I do think that there are so many different things that have occurred, especially to women who, you know, as a society are continuously traumatized by. So I would say, yeah, I just don't think a lot of people are aware of that in themselves. So when clients come in, I'm not sure they would always link that to the word trauma, and I think that the education around what trauma is imperative, because I think people, because of how much we see and read online, people have a reaction to that word that maybe is misunderstood. And I think that people don't think of themselves as being traumatized because they compare it to something that's more drastic in their opinion of what they think trauma is. But I think on a lot of levels, we could probably trace any type of trauma to different clients, and to the majority of people, like you're saying, especially with generational trauma that you're referencing with, you know, doctors knows best, and you know, generations that have been forced to, I guess, the shut up and put up type of personality, to have. And even in that same generation that you're talking about, there wasn't a lot of safety in finding help. And I think that's also what's changed. And so because finding help is a lot less stigmatized now, it's my job and others like us to inform people of what trauma is and how it can manifest in your life and how subtle it can be and how it can inform how you police yourself or not as far as getting help or healing. And I think that there's so many layers. There's so many layers to it. And I think that it's like a good and bad thing that we have access to as much information as we have. And also, it's also, I guess there's pros and cons to understanding as much as we do. I think it's, you know, can be overwhelming for those who don't have assistance in navigating that information. I think it can be, there's the self-diagnosis culture that we're seeing too that's not helpful. I would say that especially TikTok, dare I say it. But I have a lot of clients that will come in and they'll come in with diagnoses that they've declared they feel they have, but when I start to work with them a little bit more, I can see that it's not necessarily what they read online, but there is something to work on. It's just not what they think is, let's say, pop culture at the moment. So I think there's a lot of different things that you're bringing up that could be both positive and negative for a client's experience, and also has given us so much more information that we can use to help our clients. So I think it's on the burden's on us, Kate, in helping people navigate all that's out there and all that stuff that really could be linked to them, maybe even feeling empowered by what they've experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. From my more Eastern medicine background in Ayurvedic medicine, where like the subtle body is very well mapped out, like unlike in Western medicine where we have these words like mind that are like, you know, somewhat nebulous, right?
Right.
It's really quite different. And then like how much do we source safety from our core group, our core tribe, and the assumptions and beliefs and bonding and, you know, process and resolution, grievance resolution, like within our communities, right? And then like what's happening now as the younger generations are more and more isolated and therefore experiencing different types of just trauma from not having social bonding like humans have had for forever. So I'm just curious like what you see
I would say
Yeah.
I would say, like, especially the younger generations, I didn't grow up with a phone in my face, for example. So, that is something that I was obviously, COVID was 5 years ago. So I would say the younger generation, like my kids who went through COVID, who had technology pushed down their throat and had to rely on technology to get through school and also be socially isolated at the same time. Now that group is going into college. And that group is not really well prepared for all that the world really is because they've been filtering that entire world through something like this. And they've had no choice to. So in order for you to even be educated about what is coming next, it was on a screen and without your peers nearby. It was on a screen in your own bedroom by yourself, where your peers are in their own bedroom by themselves. So I would say that was traumatic for that generation. I think they're going to be they're I've already seen in my own work they have difficulty navigating stress and pressure of having to know how to interact with other people and knowing how to interact with other I'll say even just life circumstances that when I was growing up I felt like was a kind of a no-brainer on how to do something, how to get through, how to troubleshoot or problem solve. Seems like it was something a lot more accessible to my generation than to my children's generation. I would say that was technology. Like I said earlier in the call, there's pros and cons to us having access to as much information as we have, but there's a lot of misinformation that's there too, and that also can be a traumatic experience for people, especially if they're going to be filtering their entire existence and life on a screen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see what you're talking about in terms of the problem solving, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you problem solve without your phone? How do you find
Well,
your way from here to there?
Well, the
How,
system itself is it's self-perpetuating. So you can't always access what you need without some sort of technology now. You can't always access the help that you might want without having technology be the barrier between you and getting that help. It could be a therapist, it could be a doctor, it could be a human design reading. It could be anything, but you might need your phone in order to get through to that next step. And then even if you wanted to go out and get supplements that you wanted, they're not always available on the shelves anymore. You can't just go to a health food store and expect everything you need to be there. You might have to order it.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we're definitely in, and then it's like tech, how do we think, right? Given AI, right? And the studies on that with high school students using AI, like their ability to just just develop cognitively and create basically like create a position on a topic is being
Yeah.
hindered by.
I think AI needs to be regulated in a sense of the education around AI needs to be more focused on that it's a tool. It's a tool to help assist us in things. It can't replace human connection. It can't replace your therapist or your coach that you've been working with for however long that you've established rapport with. It can't replace that for you because ultimately the way AI is designed, and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that it will mirror what you give it. So if it's mirroring what you're giving it, it's not really unbiased. It's just giving you a mirror of your own thoughts, which isn't really always healthy.
Right.
Sometimes you need an outsider's perspective, which is where I could get that if I was working with someone like you or if I was working with someone like me. But if I'm only interacting with my AI for my mental health or for my crisis or maybe it's just advice, maybe it's not crisis. But what I'm seeing in my field is this turn to lean on AI in a way that's not necessarily it's not really well guided. I would say it's misguided in a lot of ways, and there are some benefits with ambient note taking and things like that to help the clinician streamline their practice. But when it comes to true clinical diagnosis, it's about the gift that the client has with the therapist. It's not something that we go through AI for.
Yeah.
So I would say that's definitely something that's been on my radar and a concern of mine for my clients because I feel like there's a lot of, again, misinformation about how powerful and helpful AI can be. I think there's a lot of things that it can do administratively that's great. But when it comes to the art, like I said earlier, the art of conversation, my coaching experience would be different between different coaches that I choose to work with. But AI, it wouldn't. It would be the same. It would be the same whatever I give it. It's going to give back to me.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about trauma and bonding and triggers and the connection between a practitioner or a therapist and a client or patient, and then also a group, and what happens in nervous system and bonding as someone's trying to heal. So wherever you want to go with that.
I would say that if you're able to establish a rapport with your therapist and you can see yourself talking to them outside of that session, even though you're not necessarily doing that, but if you can see yourself being able to, that makes the therapy a lot more valuable for the client if they feel like they can relate in some way. I would say that the rapport that you have with your client helps assist in their guidance with regard to feeling empowered with what they want to, change in their life. Perhaps they come in with specific goals, or maybe they don't, and you help them identify those goals. Maybe they experience something that they didn't think was going to come out in therapy. That's also happened sometimes. And I think that when you can have someone witness your pain and witness your journey, there's something really beautiful about that process. And the parallel process that we experience as therapists is we're their cheerleaders. We're sitting there very hopeful that they're going to get to that breakthrough point in their lives where they feel like they're able to make a change on their own. And there are people that will complete therapy and just go off into the world feeling so much more centered and grounded and being able to trust themselves. And that's really the ultimate goal in therapy, is to help somebody feel like they have an unbiased, non-judgmental space where they can come out and unpack whatever's going on in their head and be able to do that on their own when they're not with their therapist. I think with group therapy, there's so many other aspects that I think people don't realize group therapy can provide. And it's my favorite part about it is everybody's in the same boat feeling. So there's this camaraderie that's automatic because everybody's there for a similar reason. And you can lean on that group experience to help push you through to whatever it is that you're working on. I think groups are very valuable in that way. I think, being a former I used to do group work full time in my earlier part of my career. And I think the beauty about being a group facilitator at that time was just watching how the group feeds off of each other in a positive way and then helps each other in a way that I don't think you can always get one-on-one.
Yeah. Yeah, what we've noticed in our clubs is that, it's like the more we understand about mental health and trauma, the more we understand that our daily habits make just an unbelievable amount of difference. Like, it's like, if you want to be overweight and unhappy and unsatisfied, like, stay up late. It'll screw with your hunger satiation cycles. Like, wake up late, right? Like, don't physically exercise, start carb loading, right? Like, then this is just like a recipe for anxiety, depression, frustration, irritation, dysfunctional relationships with other people. And so the more we look at like, well, that means that like going to bed early, waking up early, doing breath bodying type practices, having some sort of fasting regulation to regulate the microbiome so that the body's producing serotonin and dopamine, right? That like this largely regulates mental health. So the more we tie that there's physical habits that are part really of a diagnosis and a therapeutic solution, right? Then it's like, oh, well, then we're kind of in it together. And then that helps to me from this place of like, oh, I am identifying with my diagnosis as like, I'm someone that has this particular, mental or physiological dis-ease, right? To like, oh wait, I'm just human and other humans need to do this to feel good too. And the way that our mental and physiological diseases manifest has something to do with our genetics and something to do with what's happening in our life that's either triggering these epigenetic changes at the level of our DNA. And then it's like, oh wait, instead of it being so separate that like I'm the only one who needs to stop drinking, or I'm the only one who needs to change my diet, or I'm the only one who needs to go to bed early and waking up early. It's like, oh wait, no, like we're primates. Like these are the habits that helped our physiology drive towards the kind of evolution where we can generate AI, like where we can think. So then that's what I'm kind of curious about is like where does talk therapy, where is it very limited in the one-on-one like where is it extremely helpful and necessary, and then where is it really limited in terms of helping people make the changes that we know are part of our constitutional mental health as a species.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak for how everybody runs their therapy sessions, but my own in the first 6 sessions, I definitely go through what, like, I want someone to help me see how they live every day. I need to understand how you already run your life so that I can understand where you might need to tweak things so that you have a better foundation. I can't really, of course, I can throw skills at people, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be practicing them unless I understand how they manage their time, how do they operate in their day to day.
Yeah.
So some of the most important parts of my therapy work with my one-on-ones is in the very beginning, we have to establish what their routine is that exists without any help. I'm just curious, like, how do you, all the things that you said, staying up late, are you on your phone? How close is your phone? Are you sleeping with your phone? Is that phone light on all the time? Are you going to bed, are you getting up early? Are you feeling fatigued? Do you have a vitamin regimen? Do you eat breakfast? Do you eat any food? Are you drinking water? All those things are questions that I have to find out in the very beginning. One of the things that I do share with all of my new intakes, all the work that I want to do with you in that 1 hour that I get a week is only as much as I can do. Outside of that, the whole rest of the week between sessions is on you to be doing some of that work behind the scenes so that when I do get to see you, our hour is powerful. I need you to be doing stuff in between our sessions so that the work that we're doing together is more impactful. Because I can't follow you around and swat things out of your hand that you're not supposed to be eating and things that you're not supposed to be doing throughout the day. I can't monitor you that way or be like a little version of myself where I sit in someone's pocket and I'm like, don't do that. So I can't get that. I don't have that privilege. So I do explain that a lot of the work that happens that is the most powerful for each client is what they choose to repeat. What did they choose to repeat that's going to facilitate and foster the growth that they need to accomplish their goals? So when we establish those goals together, we're going to basically plan out what would have to happen for us to achieve those goals. What has to change for you to be able to get to that version of yourself that you just told me you want to see one day? We don't have to have a necessarily timeline on it, but I want to know what would be the most ideal outcome here, and then what has to change in the interim for that to happen and become more real for you. So we do go over foundational things in that sense. We do talk about habit stacking. We talk about how we can introduce new things to things that already exist. One of my most favorite things that I ask people is, do you get dressed before work or do you go to work naked? And, 10 out of 10 times they tell me they go to work clothed. And I said, okay, great. So how do you get yourself to that point in the morning? Tell me what happens when that alarm clock goes off. If an alarm clock goes off, how do you wake up? Where do you go next? And then wherever that is in that morning, I say, can we stack this with maybe when your coffee maker starts making coffee, can you have a positive affirmation that you say to yourself? Can you also partner this with water? Can you partner, your words of affirmation or your gratitude practice with when you're getting ready and looking in the mirror? Are you able to, find a way in the car even where you're able to repeat the vision statement we just created? Can you help partner it with something that's already going to happen so that we know that you can, if somebody doesn't feel like they're taking extra time out of their day to do something, sometimes it's more accessible to them. So if I can get them to pair that with something that's already going to happen, regardless if they're working on themselves, you're already going to get in that car to go to work. You're not going to skip that day. Can we partner this with something that already exists so that it's more successful? You have a more successful outcome if you braid it in. Once we do that, I go through, things that they can do to regulate themselves when they feel an uptick in stress that day, or they feel like maybe their hunger hormone's not going on because they're super stressed that day and their cortisol is up, and then they're not getting any signals that they're hungry or thirsty because they're in fight or flight mode to try to get a deadline done for work and they're not paying attention to the other things. So we try to build in some check-ins throughout the day so that they can be checking in with their body, checking in with what they might need, something they may or may not have given themselves, and try to tweak it from there. So that's the early stages of our work together, because I need to understand, how have you been treating yourself? Have you been in survival mode for 22 years before you got to sit with me and take inventory on that? I need to assess all those things with people in the beginning. And then I have to also emphasize the time and attention that you give yourself in between our sessions helps you get to the end game of whatever it is that they've drawn up with me, which is their vision statement that helps guide us with our work.
Yeah.
So, and if they've been traumatized at any point then that also factors into how much care and time and attention we have to put into each step. Because I have to kind of account for what might be disruptive to them throughout the week.
So it's large. I mean, what I'm hearing, and this is what I'm really seeing in mental health in general, is like it's so individual, right? And then yet the power, what we're finding in clubs is like the power is in like, wait, these are human habits, and it's easier as a group to change our habits than it is as an individual. Because often as an individual, we're the only person in our family or our friend group, right, that's changing.
Yep.
And then because of that, it feels like the momentum of the commune, of like the communal relationship, the tribal structure, is going to be something that now I have to like work against, right? And so then how do we create a like, this is totally normal, like everybody's changing and everyone's growing and this is what healthy people do. So we have to be in like a healthy micro culture in order to get much faster momentum. And what I love that what you guys are doing in, you know, what you're doing in your clinic is this like integration between these therapies that are physical to the body, with a talk therapy. Because when there's just this talk therapy type approach, it can be so limiting in terms of some of the momentum that we need to gain to change our habits and to have different types of experiences, somatic experiences in our body to re-regulate our nervous system.
Right, which is why Limitless became a partnership with Root and Rise, because the talk therapy is limited. It is very individual based, which is why having all the other clinicians available to them is so helpful. Because my ability to ferry someone from one side of the river to the other is limited in what I'm able to give them within that session and within my scope of practice. And then they have access, you know, through me to this other side where they can now pick who they want to work with. That might work on the spiritual layer, that might work on the energetic layer, that might work on some more physical layers, but that they're linked to maybe a different layer at the same time. So we have all these different clinicians that are available, and they all have, like I was saying earlier in our call, they have their own groups, they have workshops, they do a lot of things that are with like-minded individuals where people might want to, what I find is once you're doing this work, sometimes you want to change your tribe. Sometimes you want to find a new tribe. And so that is also where they're able to do that. They're able to find like-minded individuals that are on a healing journey that they want to now become friends with and work with and have that camaraderie. Because like I said, there's a lot that groups can give that individual can't give. So that's part of why Limitless was born, is to just enhance the healing journey, because there's things that I won't be able to do as an individual clinician, and I knew that. And so the nutritionist, a personal trainer, a hormone specialist, a hypnosis individual, somebody who does Reiki, someone who does cupping, lymphatic drainage, red light therapy, psychic coaching, spiritual coaching. You know, there's so many different aspects that I can't, but what I can do is I can point in the right direction, right? So if I'm able to say, like, you can go here and you can find so many other things. So like Neverland.
And what are you finding in terms of, like, you know, private practice paying out of pocket versus insurance for what's happening with nervous system regulation and the dysregulated?
So, well, I've never accepted insurance. I've always been private pay. So in 14 years, I've never accepted insurance, because my experience in other practices that I worked when I was coming up through the system and basically getting my clinical hours and working in places that did accept insurance, what I noticed early on, and I hear about this all the time from other people who have to deal with this, is there's insurances are gatekeepers for health. And they gatekeep in a way that well, at least where I am, they don't really provide access to the kind of care and individuals that would be able to help. And so they dictate what we can offer. They dictate the amount of time we can spend with our people. They dictate what we can charge. They dictate when they will. In short, they don't want to pay for services rendered, and they don't want to. There's a lot. I would say early on, the biggest problem I had was the lack of privacy and the lack of autonomy that someone could have in their own health journey. And I felt like that was really counterintuitive to being healed. And so when I opened my own private practice, I didn't want to have insurance dictate how I cared for my clients. And I didn't want them to dictate what I was able to offer them. So I don't work with insurance, but private pay, I feel like it enhances the privacy. It enhances your ability to have curated care, and it doesn't. There's no limitations in what we can give you.
Yeah. So let's talk about this a little bit, because when we really look at what's going on, we're saying then more or less in mental health that to really get good care, you have to pay out of pocket. And
That's
so
been my
someone,
experience.
yeah, and it's in my experience as well. It's like, I would say to be healthy and to be well, you have to pay out of pocket. So then we look at like sick care and the insurance, what is covered by insurance, and how much security people have in that as being somewhat misleading, right? Just in terms of like the idea
Yeah.
with health insurance and with companies subsidized health insurance, et cetera, is that like this is for your wellness, when it's really increasingly seen as not
Right.
that. So
Exactly.
if we have to be, to be like mentally thriving, and if we're coming in with dysregulated nervous system, which we've already agreed is like a lot of people, right? Like, what are we looking at? It's like how much should people budget to, especially if they know that like they're becoming aware of like a trauma informed pattern, if they are largely dysregulated, like what does that look like for someone who's just thinking about this?
Okay. So I would say, I think first you have to shift how you're looking at the investment, right? So I think when someone's trying to work this into their budget, they have to also alter how they value themselves, their own health, and if they would be willing to invest in their own journey. Because I think a lot of times the thing that I run up against as a self-pay practice is sometimes the cost doesn't measure well with the individual. And so even though I offer a sliding scale for people, and I do have, I try to make it as affordable as I can, there are moments where I say, I experience a client feeling like it's not an expense that they can afford themselves. So I think the first hurdle is, if you're going to start making room for this in your life, is there something that you're currently doing in your life that doesn't really necessarily benefit your health that you spend money on? And can you remove that to give yourself some more room to throw that towards possibly investing in your own wellness journey? Because it will be a long-term investment, and it could become costly, but if you're willing to adjust how you currently spend money on yourself, and where you might be putting money towards something that does the counter opposite, or it's counterintuitive to your health, would you be willing to let that go and put that money towards a service or a product that would be beneficial to you? And think of it as a long-term investment into your wellness, a long-term investment into your happiness and health. So if you can look at that as a non-negotiable for yourself, then I think that somebody would ease into that process a lot better than if they were to look at this as, it's too expensive for me.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm curious about too, because like one of the things that we do in Wellness Pro Academy is we really look at like a year-long transformation of like, how do we invest based on that? Relationships take time to cultivate, changes take time to stabilize, right? And that there's a big exploration that's often happening when someone is on what we call a depth path, or like actually getting into their issues and the lifestyle changes that they're going to need to make in order to have a breakthrough. That like we want to benefit, that time's on our side, and the law of accumulation. And then the other thing that I see is like with that like bigger picture thinking, as opposed to this like sort of like one-off appointment thinking. I'm just curious how you guys have navigated that, where it's like, oh, I'm being triggered, so I'll schedule now, versus like I'm on this longer term journey to stabilizing a much higher, like integrated, connected ecosystem of my emotional health.
Yeah. So explaining the ecosystem to people isn't always, I would say it's not always accessible, in the sense of, especially if I do see this a lot where people will only respond in crisis. And so it's usually addressed pretty early on. If somebody has a tendency to only respond to their defensively, we'll say they're defensively reacting to things that are in their lives instead of being more offensive, which is, in preparation of having your wellness already established. So only responding in crisis will only give you short-term results. And so short-term results are not going to basically give you the bang for your buck that you really want. And so I think that people end up learning that the hard way. I'm a pretty forthcoming and transparent therapist. I do call myself the no BS KS. So I will say that when it comes to people only responding in crisis, they're not going to be happy with their results because they don't last long. And so it's something that's highlighted early on so that they understand, let's make this so that you can see the entire ecosystem that you really need in order to have sustained health and wealth, because when you're not healthy, your life is not wealthy. So you want to have the ability to have access to all these wonderful things that you want to experience in life. But if you're only responding like whack-a-mole, that's kind of how it ends up feeling, is like you're only whack-a-moling things in your life, you're not going to have those long-term results that you really desire. So I would say that's something that has to be discussed early on, and also to try to help educate the individual in what they're really putting their money towards. Like, you have to be smart about what you're doing. Everything's expensive in life. Everything can be more expensive when you're not prepared. So I would say it's important to really know what you're looking at and what you can get and benefit from if you were to, streamline some of the choices that you make versus the whack-a-mole approach.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's like, how do you get the bigger picture perspective, right? Of like, this is what's showing up right now, and this is what's normal in your everyday life, and like, where are you really trying to go? And like, that's a specific type of a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. It is definitely, especially when I do have the conversations about how therapy really should be looked at as a long-term investment, and it doesn't necessarily have to be weekly. All the time throughout that lifespan that you might be with a therapist. You could start weekly, and then as things progress, you can, let's say, wean down to bi-weekly, once a month, and then as needed. But it should be looked at as a long-term investment, because there's so many things that really flow into your therapy. And because my approach has always been a full wheel of life, which has all these different slices of things that I don't necessarily address, but I want to highlight with you that that you have to be on that journey of addressing so that you could have a better full picture. It's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and it's going to take intention. And I think it's important to highlight that, and it's about the long game, or the long distance run, as opposed to the sprint. And incorporating as many different modalities as you can with trusted clinicians is important, because, you want your money to be going far for you. Then you also have to be showing up with the intention of making sure that you're continuing on that path. Because, like I say to clients that sit with me, I can't solve it with you in an hour. You've got 6 days in between seeing me again. Let's try to make this so that you're doing some things in between our sessions so that we can gain some traction.
Yeah.
You have to grow roots.
Yeah. So let's talk about true nervous system dysregulation, and like how people can maybe recognize if they're dysregulated.
Okay. So I would say, we have to go through the inventory of what someone experiences, right? Because they might not always be aware of what's being dysregulated at the moment. So I would say, taking inventory is important. I usually like to teach grounding skills in my sessions, my first 2 to 3 sessions, to show them how to properly breathe and how to ground their physical body, because sometimes you're not going to have access to your short-term memory or your frontal cortex when you're triggered. So if you don't have access to that, you're not going to be able to redirect or think your way out of it, because you're not going to have access to those portions of your brain. So I like to try to help people understand that this is something that has to be practiced every single day, because we have to bring it from your short-term to your long-term so that you have access to it. Being dysregulated could look a lot of different ways for people. It could look like they're dissociated in that moment. It could be that they're sweating profusely. It could be dry mouth. It could be, lightheadedness. It could feel like pain in your body somewhere. It could feel like you have to go to the bathroom. It could feel like you're unable to move. There's lots of different things that could occur for each individual. And I think oftentimes people, unless they're able to articulate it in the moment, when I'm doing the grounding exercise with people, that's when they start to notice what it feels like to be grounded, which means that the alternative was that they weren't grounded before we did that exercise. And then we're able to compare and contrast the differences that they were feeling before they did the grounding exercise to when they did it. And that's when we're able to kind of establish the baseline of when they're dysregulated, it feels like this. And when they're grounded, it feels like this. And now they have something to contrast and compare it to. And so when I say that they have to do this every single day, one of the analogies I give is, when you're about to get into a car accident, is that when you put your seatbelt on, or do you have your seatbelt on beforehand? And so most times people are like, my seatbelt's already on, I'm not even thinking about it. And I'm like, when do you put it on when you get into the car? Like, at what point? And they said, I don't even think about it. It just goes on. And I said, okay, so that means that it's always on. It's not like when you're about to have impact, you put the seatbelt on, right? And they're like, yeah. I was like, well, that's how grounding and breathing have to be. You don't want to just use them in a time of crisis because you're not going to have access to them. You want to be doing this every single day when you're not triggered, so that when you are triggered, you know how to automatically access them. We can't get it to just be there at the point of impact. We have to do this every single day when we feel great, because then you're not going to know it's there when you need it. So that's kind of the ways I introduce our own awareness of skills and how to practice them, because we can't just respond in crisis similarly to when we seek help, because then we're not going to necessarily get what we need in that moment.
Yeah, it's the same in yoga and Ayurveda, where you establish what's called dinacharya, which is like the daily rhythm, and really starts with when you wake up, and that really starts with when you went to bed, which really starts with how late you ate dinner and what you did the night before, to like how able you are to wake up. The time before the dawn is when we have the most access, right? This most ability to make change, this most neuroplasticity, or access into the liminal space. So it's like, if we can't change that for a person, it's going to be 10 times harder. Like if we can't get them like, wake up, do 10 sun salutations, or do 5 minutes of pranayama, or something that's getting you into your breath body, into your physical body with the breath, coordinating breath, movement, body. Like that's the theme. And that's been, like this ancient human wisdom, like we've known that forever. So then if you skip a day, you notice, like you're saying, it's like if you skip a day, you're like, oh, I'm not that flexible. Oh, my knee hurts a little bit. Like, oh, I'm totally overreacting to my baby crying, or to my spouse's desire to do something else tonight,
Right.
And then we have that context. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me how, like, what's happening in so much in, various fields of Western medicine, from like women's hormone therapy to, mental health and social work, how it's like, it's all starting to find its way back to the ancient, just these ancient wisdom traditions, which were like, first regulate yourself with the universe, then navigate people.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So as we're, as people are in, let's just say this, people have identified that they're in trauma recovery, or that they're now more trauma informed themselves and re-regulating their nervous system. Like one of the, often they use language around triggers, like this triggers me, that triggers me, this other person triggers me. And sometimes that can have like a victim-y type of a thing of like, this person's triggering me, therefore it's like they're the issue, right? Because they have this issue that's triggering me. And I'm just so curious how you respond when you hear language like that. Or,
That's where I blame TikTok. No.
Yeah, right?
I will say, when I hear individuals say that, I ask them, to help me understand what they were observing at the time. I want to understand how they're looking at their landscape that day, or that particular moment that they're describing to me. I want to know how much stimuli they had. Because oftentimes what I find is it's not necessarily something that they can trace because of that person, and where we end up ultimately settling on, it's the energy that they were experiencing in that exchange, or it's the energy in that particular atmosphere when they were experiencing that person that felt triggering to them, and not necessarily always that individual. So I try to get an understanding of the stimuli that person is taking on. So what I like to explain to clients, think of yourself as an antenna who's always transmitting and receiving. And if you're always transmitting and receiving, there's times that you can feel flooded by information and energy and frequency. And so that's, when we're, and let's just picture that as static, right? So that's now static because it's too much. You can't take it all in. So if we want to get a clear picture, let's try to understand how we can make that energy frequency clearer so we can understand what was going on. And so if you also think of yourself as this antenna, it's also possible for you to be bogged down at different points in your day if you don't have a really good self-care practice, or if you don't have a practice, a ritual every day of let's say, like wringing out, if you picture a sponge, wringing out the sponge from the day and everything that you might have absorbed. If you don't have a good practice of getting that off of you or decompressing, it's possible that you're carrying that on from day to day. So if you don't have a practice, but maybe by Wednesday, you're completely bogged down, and it wasn't necessarily about that individual that was triggering to you. You didn't have the bandwidth to navigate that person's frequency. So if you didn't have the bandwidth to navigate that person's frequency, let's start to unpack what was going on leading up to this event, what happened when you were there, and then what did you do with that experience afterwards. As it helps me also understand how someone is navigating their human interactions, because we're all antennas, and if we're all transmitting frequencies throughout our day, it's our responsibility to be able to manage ourselves and how we're managing the energy we allow in. So I get into more of an I'll say an educational role in that moment to help someone understand, but I also want to remain validating for that person's experience. But I definitely want them to be careful of labeling their experiences a certain way, because that will then filter into how they always see that person. And it may not always be the same way each time, but they're gonna, it's almost like their brain is just gonna associate, I don't like this, and then it's gonna be what's the word I'm looking for? I want to increase someone's distress tolerance skills. So if we're going to have circumstances where we might come across people we don't like, can we use distress tolerance skills to navigate that? But I also have to understand everything that's going on leading up to that, which might mean a little bit more back and forth with the client so that I can understand how they're taking care of their energy field.
Yeah. Right. And their level of awareness, right?
Right.
So I'm also curious about, like, we're increasingly seeing this like iatrogenic trauma or trauma induced by the medical industry from, like, whether it's like cancer treatment, whether it's like vaccines, whether it's like long haul vaccine trauma. Like, what are you seeing in that?
I personally went through my own traumatic experience with vaccine injury and the medical field, which is part of what catapulted me into creating Limitless. So I went through many years of being gaslit and told that what I had was not what I had. I had to seek out my own help and assistance, Eastern medicine wise, to be able to get back to the Western side and marry the two so that I could get myself to a platform of stabilization, if you will. So I'm still in the journey, but it started in 2021. So I will say that I see it a lot. It's more common than you think, and it's definitely something that needs to be spoken about more.
Yeah, I think those of us who are more in holistic are seeing a lot more of it maybe than those who aren't. Maybe just because
because you guys are more open to talking about it.
Yeah. Would you tell a little bit about your story about being gaslit? Are you comfortable with that?
Sure. Sure, absolutely. So I went through a period of time where I wanted to. It was in COVID, and we were trying to figure out where the world was at that point. I had a couple of reasons why I wanted to get my vaccine early, even though I was aware of all the risks doing that. I had two parents that were going through cancer treatments at the time, who lived out of state, and because they needed me to help them with this period of their life, I wanted to make sure I was protecting them from possibly bringing anything to them. And it was so early on, I knew I didn't have a lot of information, so I did what I did. Very shortly after, I felt a difference in my body, and I started to experience symptoms that were problematic. My hair fell out. I had pre-existing conditions that I knew about when I was younger that were flaring now, that were dormant for 20-something years. So a whole bunch of different things were occurring. I went down and I helped my parents. I came back up, and I was still feeling really awful. Lack of energy, brain fog, And basically all the symptoms that you now see for long haul COVID is what I had, but what I was ultimately diagnosed as was a vaccine injury. It took 3
Who
years for
diagnosed you?
the Patterson Group. They were the first ones. Long story short, they were a band of doctors from all over the country that grouped together to compare notes about their experience with the CDC. They unpopularly, started a lab and started to try to offer help to people that were being gaslit across the globe. So, long story short, they threw me into a study, and they were able to find that I had mutated red blood cells and cardiovascular response to the spike protein. And they were able to tell me that by testing my blood. Everything was out of pocket and everything was expensive, but I wanted to get an answer because every single person I went to told me what I had was not happening. So I went to a gynecologist. She said nothing was wrong. I went to a dermatologist. He said, there's something wrong, but it's not what you think it is. I went to 3 endos, and they said, no, nothing's going on. But I went to the Patterson Group and did a virtual telehealth session when they were in California and I was in New York a handful of times, and they were able to tell me every single thing that I had was real. And it was validating in a way because I knew I wasn't crazy, but it was good to have an answer because everything that I was doing leading up to this, which was I was already consulting my nutritionist, my NRT therapist. I was with an NP who specialized in ozone treatment. I was doing all of these things. I was changing my diet. I was doing all these different things physically and mentally so that I could try to assist my body in supporting it through whatever might happen. And then when I finally got the validation from the Patterson Group, who was also referred to me by an Eastern holistic provider. She said, this is somebody that I think you might be able to get an answer from. And from that point forward, they worked together with my combined team of Eastern practitioners and Western practitioners to be able to bring me to a point where I was stabilized. I could get out of bed and not have joint pain and not have 30 pounds of inflammation on my body and not have half of my head bald, so that I could actually get back to work. I wasn't able to work as much as I was and get my life back. So that's it in short. But I had to go through this journey of really trusting my intuition about what I thought was true and leaning on my holistic background. And I was raised very holistic. My mom was 40 plus years ahead of her time. So I grew up with, NRT in the house, magnet therapy, filtered water when no one else did, yoga, Ayurvedic techniques that my mom was pushing when Ritalin was the craze, when in the early 90s, everybody was being diagnosed as ADHD and being put on Ritalin. My mom was like, absolutely not. So fast forward, I leaned back into my roots, found a bunch of clinicians that were able to support me, did get the Western help partially, and then they all worked together, and that's how Limitless was born.
Yeah, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In short.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like this is going to really be a next huge wave. Is this?
Absolutely. And so now the Patterson Group has developed a protocol that has now created our first long haul COVID clinics in the country. So their work basically set the tone for how to approach long haul COVID and especially how it affects women, because it affects women very differently than it affects men. So now, because of their work and because of the studies that I was able to participate in the first 3 years, it's now established the protocol to help individuals, which is an Eastern and Western approach when it comes to holistic care with long haul COVID. Because even though I never personally had COVID, I had the vaccine injury instead, it has the same symptoms. And so it's a very similar protocol in healing. But it does require diligence, self-pay, and the fortitude to continue on when you feel tired and frustrated. But my entire experience was basically going into a doctor's office and being told that even though you've been, for example, bleeding for 4 weeks, you're not bleeding for 4 weeks. That's not really what's happening. And I've never experienced being gaslit by a medical professional until then. And I was lucky that I was an adult at the time, because I can't imagine being a child or being even maybe just a younger adult and really not having the education or access to care and just being blindly led by people who were like, there's nothing wrong with you. Just take what they were trying to diagnose me with actually in the beginning was diabetes, which I didn't have. And they were like, just take metformin and go home. And I'm like, I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense. So there was just so many different experiences like that, and the Western doctors that I did see that were unrelated to this journey, that were very, let's say, I'll say outspoken, was my dentist and my dermatologist, who were like, I think this might have been from the COVID vaccine. It's unlikely that it wouldn't have something to do with it. It's so new, and it's the most recent new introduction that you had in your life in that moment when all these things happen. It would be crazy for us to not consider it.
Yeah.
And they were just two individuals that really weren't related to any of my conditions, that were like, you should probably get another opinion, and also, call these other individuals that that can give you the supplements that you need, that can give you the help that you need for the inflammation or the other symptoms that were coming up that were dormant in my body for 20 years, that were able to help me. But yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a long 4 years.
Did you intuitively know that it was
Absolutely.
vaccine?
100%.
So, yeah.
I knew within a day that that's what it was. But I also wanted to, it was still in a point where we were in lockdown, that like I was driving to Florida. There was no flights. So I wanted to not freak out that this was possibly what was going on. So it was one of those things that I would say I compartmentalized until I was able to get through visiting my parents. And then when I got back up to New York, I was like, shit, I think this is what's going on.
Yeah.
So, but then to like not really know who you could talk to about it at the time was also a lot.
Yeah.
Or now, and to not, you're right, or now, and I wasn't really sure how to approach it, so I definitely went to the tribe I knew would not judge, and I went straight to the eastern side of the people I knew.
Yeah.
And I was like, guys, this is, I don't know, and it was just so, I leaned into that so much that I had such a great, I already had established relationships with these individuals. I was so excited to be able to just be like, gee, this is what I did a thing, and I didn't mean to make it this bad, but I think this is what's going on. Yeah. And so I was able to, at least get some guidance to the degree that I was able to feel well enough to continue the journey. Like, there wasn't one thing that helped. It was a combination of things that assisted, but I was able to get to a point where, and then eventually I found a family practitioner, an MD who did, for the first time in a really long time, was able to say, oh yeah, of course that could have totally been what happened. And she didn't naysay anything that I was doing. She said, I will be honest with you, I don't understand it. She said, but if it's helping, then let's continue doing it. And because she was so willing to work with the eastern side of my team, and then everybody ended up meeting I made everybody meet together in a group in person to kind of go over the notes and the stuff so that we could come up with a treatment plan that worked. And everybody worked so well together, and nobody naysayed each other, and everybody respected each other's lane. That's how Limitless was really born. And those are all the first founding members of the team, is all the clinicians that I personally deeply trust to be able to help anybody on their journey. And since that happened, I've had so many clients that have long haul COVID and a vaccine injury that have sought me out to get access to this team.
Yeah. And so with long haul COVID, how many of them were vaccine injured, do you think? Like, what percentage?
At least half. At least half. And the other half didn't get the vaccine but have long haul COVID.
Okay.
So it's like split right down the middle with the individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good to know. It's just good for other therapists to kind of hear what's going on. I mean, I work more on like the health coach side of things, but there's often with practitioners, they don't really know what's going on with each other's practices as much, or what's happening, and depending on their politics, that can really, I find, influence how people think about vaccine injury and iatrogenic trauma in general. I had from vaccine exposure, so I wasn't actually vaccinated, but I had massive vaccine exposure on an airplane. I write about it in Witch's Cancer Journal, and had a turbo tumor. Wow. And I knew within about 48 hours of the plane ride, and it was crazy, like just the bleeding, and you're like, try to explain that. Like, that's even harder to explain in terms of iatrogenic trauma.
Right. Right. Definitely.
Well,
you
thanks so
definitely
much
know.
for coming on the show, Kristina. It's been great to just hear your perspective on, just trauma and coaching and individuals investing and how to find the people that really get you. So again, Kristina's website is rootandrisecs.com. Yeah, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.